Shakespeare's epoch. The age that gave birth to Shakespeare's work is a significant and bright chapter in history. It was an era when the old feudal world seemed to be unshakable and immutable for centuries, when new, bourgeois relations were born. Marx called this era, the dawn of the era of capitalism. Above the old world with its strictly established feudal hierarchy, handicraft guilds, quiet, patriarchal cities and monasteries like universities, the wind of a new era was blowing over the still, stagnant world with its limited horizons. According to the greatest of Shakespeare's predecessors, the English playwright Christopher Marlowe, it was the wind that drove the world into motion, the thirst for gold. On the stage of history there appears, as a political force, the bourgeoisie, as well as a new nobility, which sees the guarantee of its prosperity not only in noble privileges, but primarily in the accumulation of material riches. The very word, gentleman, in the original sense, a nobleman, is becoming more widely used. On the one hand, it is increasingly possible to find gentlemen by birth who are engaged in commercial matters or go overseas in search of profit, driven by the wind that spreads young people around the world to seek success in foreign lands, as Petruchio says in the comedy Shakespeare's The Taming of the Shrew. On the other hand, those who came out of the lower classes, but managed to fill themselves with moss, are increasingly being called gentlemen, regardless of their origin. In 1568, the London Stock Exchange was founded. In the second half of the 16th century, companies were organized for trade with overseas countries. In 1553, Russian Company, in 1581, Eastern Company, in 1600, East India Company. During the same time, several African companies were organized. The Russian Company imported wood, tar, hemp, wax, furs, as well as balac and caviar to England. Eastern Company silk and other luxury goods, mainly from Smyrna and Aleppo. East India Company nitrate, necessary for the production of gunpowder, as well as pepper and other spices. African companies gold and ivory. These companies brought huge incomes, often exceeding 100% per year on invested capital. The main subject of export from England were woolen fabrics. Sheep breeding became extremely profitable. Rich landowners seized vast lands, enclosed them, turned them into pastures for their sheep, and drove them out of the land, depriving them of their shelter and food. England was full of homeless, destitute people. It was an era of rapid development of navigation. English merchants, pirates and all sorts of adventurers and profiteers set off on a long journey in search of, as one of them wrote, new lands and treasures. An English pirate Francis Drake in the 70s of the XVI century made a round-the-world voyage. The ships returned to England, laden with valuable goods. They brought to England in Italian paintings, books of Italian sonnets and short stories, musical instruments, Italian and French clothes. Like geographic horizons, the horizons of the mind have also widened widely. It was an epoch when all the old bonds of society were weakened and all the inherited ideas were weakened. The world immediately became almost 10 times larger. Instead of the fourth part of the hemisphere, now the whole globe lay before the eyes of Western Europeans, who hurried to take possession of the remaining 7/8. Antique close borders homeland fell also the 1,000-year scope of the prescribed medieval thinking. External and inner eye of man opened an infinitely wider horizon. Shakespeare's contemporary Francis Bacon, 1561–1626, proclaimed the beginning of a new science based on the study of things, living nature, on real experience, science, which overthrew the eternal truths of medieval scholastics. New, realistic tendencies were born in art. This process took place even earlier in Italy. But if in Italy, a new, realistic art found its most vivid and full expression in painting, in the works of such brilliant artists as Leonardo da Vinci, Raphael, Michelangelo. In England, these realistic tendencies of art were most vividly embodied in the dramaturgy of the late XVI and the beginning of the X7th century, the crown of which was the work of Shakespeare. Many of the creators of this new, realistic art have been looking for themselves teachers in the past. However, the art of the Middle Ages was alien to them, and they turned to the art of ancient Greece and ancient Rome. They called their time themselves, and history retained this name for them, a Renaissance, the revival of ancient antiquity.